She was invisible to him until jealousy made the mafia boss lose control. The alarm was a digital scream in the 4:30 a.m. darkness. Isabella Martinez's hand shot out, slapping the plastic clock on her nightstand into silence. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of her own breathing and the rumble of a sanitation truck 2 streets over. Then the cold seeped in. The thin blanket wasn't enough, and the floorboards of her tiny studio apartment felt like sheets of ice against the soles of her feet. She rose, muscles aching from the night before, and pulled her hair back into a tight, severe bun. This was the first shift, the cafe. Later, there would be the second shift, the bar. 2 jobs, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. It was the only way to keep her head above the tide of debt her father had left when he died. He had been a good man, she reminded herself, just not a smart one with money, and the men he owed were not the forgiving type. An hour later, she was on the bus, watching the gray, sleeping city slide by. She worked at the Gilded Bean, a high-end cafe nestled in the lobby of one of the city's most imposing granite skyscrapers. The building, like the cafe itself, was owned by Romano Holdings. And every morning, Alessandro Romano came in. He arrived at precisely 7:05, just as the morning rush was beginning to swell. The air in the cafe would change the moment he pushed through the glass doors. Laughter would quiet, chatter would hush. He moved with a heavy, silent grace that demanded space, flanked always by 2 men who looked carved from the same granite as the building. His suits were dark, impossibly well-tailored, his black hair brushed back from a face that was all hard angles and cold discipline. He was, Isabella knew, her most intimidating regular. He was also the man who signed the paychecks, though she doubted he was aware of it. "Morning, Mr. Romano, the usual," she would ask. He would only nod, sliding a $50 bill across the counter. He never waited for the change. His order was always the same. A large black coffee, no room for cream, no sugar, and he would take the cup, his fingers brushing hers for less than a second, a touch that felt like static electricity, and retreat to a small table in the far corner. He would sit there for exactly 20 minutes reading a physical newspaper, his expression unreadable before disappearing back into the private elevator that led to the penthouse levels. He never spoke more than that single dismissive nod. He never looked at her. Not really. Isabella was just the hands that delivered the coffee. "You're staring at the prince again, Isabella," Carmen, her co-worker, murmured as she wiped down the espresso machine. Carmen was a decade older with kind eyes and an awareness of the world that Isabella lacked. "I am not," Isabella whispered back, her face heating. She hated that she blushed so easily. "It's okay to look. He's a handsome man," Carmen sighed, glancing over her shoulder at his corner table. "But he is a cold one." She broke into a run, but he was faster. He grabbed her arm, spinning her around and slamming her back against the graffiti-covered wall of an alley. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. "Let go of me," she gasped, striking out with her free hand. He laughed, a wet, rattling sound, and grabbed her other wrist, pinning her easily. The smell of cheap whiskey washed over her, thick and suffocating. "Playing hard to get. I like that." He pressed his body against hers. "You've been serving me all night. Time to serve me." Panic pure and blinding seized her. She opened her mouth to scream. But just as her breath drew in, the alley was flooded with blinding white light. A long black sedan had pulled up to the curb, its engine almost imperceptible hum. It was sleek and menacing, looking completely alien on the trash-strewn street. Before the drunk could even turn, 2 doors opened. 2 large men in dark suits emerged. They didn't run. They moved with a terrifying, economical purpose. The drunk, confused, let go of Isabella's wrist to raise his hands. "Hey man, this ain't your business." One of the men grabbed the drunk by the throat, silencing him. The other one hit him. A short, brutal strike to the stomach that made the man fold. They dragged him away from Isabella as if he were a sack of garbage. Then the rear door of the sedan opened. Alessandro Romano stepped out. He wasn't wearing the pristine suit from the morning. He was in a dark gray shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, and a black overcoat that seemed to drink the meager light from the street lamp. He looked taller here in the dark, more dangerous. His eyes scanned the scene. He looked at the drunk who was now being held against the car, choking. He looked at the 2 men who stood waiting for a command. Then his gaze landed on Isabella. She was pressed against the wall, shaking so hard she could barely stand. Her bag was on the ground, its contents spilled. Alessandro walked toward her, his expensive leather shoes silent on the wet pavement. He stopped a few feet away. His face was a cold mask, but his eyes, dark and intense, were focused entirely on her. She realized with a jolt that this was the first time he had ever truly looked at her. "You work in my building," he said. His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that cut straight through the night air. It was not a question. Isabella could only nod, her throat tight with fear. "You're under my protection." He looked at her for another long second, his gaze tracing the outline of her face, the tremor in her lip. He gestured to the open door of the sedan. "Get in, we'll take you home." The offer hung in the air. Safety, warmth, a ride away from this nightmare. But as the adrenaline faded, something else rose in its place. A fierce, defiant pride. She had been paying off one man's debts, trapped by her father's obligations. She would not become obligated to another, especially not this one. "No," she said. The word was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the alley, it sounded like a gunshot. One of his men turned his head, his expression shocked. Alessandro Romano's face, however, merely tightened. A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, passed through his eyes. "No," Isabella said again, louder this time. She pushed herself off the wall, bending to scoop her spilled belongings back into her bag. Her hands were still shaking. "Thank you. But no, I don't want your help." "Don't be foolish," Alessandro said, his voice hardening. "This neighborhood isn't safe." "I know," she snapped, zipping the bag with a sharp, angry pull. "I live here. I don't want to owe anyone, especially not a mafia boss." She hadn't meant to say the last part aloud. The words hung between them, reckless and dangerous. The two bodyguards tensed. Alessandro's expression remained cold, but a muscle jumped in his jaw. He studied her, this small, drenched, defiant woman who looked like she might break, yet had just refused him to his face. Isabella didn't wait to be dismissed. She pushed past him, her shoulder brushing his expensive overcoat, and walked out of the alley. She did not run, though every instinct screamed at her to. She walked fast and rigid down the dark street, expecting at any second to hear his footsteps behind her, to feel a hand on her shoulder, but nothing came. She rounded the corner, fumbled for her keys, and finally locked herself inside her apartment, collapsing against the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Alessandro stood in the rain for a long time, watching the empty space where she had disappeared. He was unsettled. He was used to people obeying him, fearing him, or begging him for favors. He was not used to being rejected. He was not used to this strange, unwelcome pull of interest. She was terrified, yet she had chosen the dangerous street over his car. He turned to his right-hand man, the one pinning the now sobbing drunk. "Find out where she lives," Alessandro ordered, his voice flat, "and get rid of that trash." The next day, Isabella went to the cafe on autopilot. She was jumpy, spilling coffee grounds, her eyes darting to the door every time the bell rang. When Alessandro Romano walked in at 7:05, she nearly dropped a tray of cups. He did not acknowledge the night before. He ordered his black coffee. He slid the 50 across the counter. That evening, Isabella sat at her small kitchen table in the Ettorio apartment. It was the first of the month, payment day. She nursed a cup of tea, her stomach in knots, and opened her laptop. She logged into the predatory lender's unstable website, the one she dreaded visiting. She navigated to the payment portal, steeling herself for the familiar, sickening subtraction from her meager savings. Account balance $0. Account status paid in full. Isabella stared at the screen. It was impossible. She refreshed the page. The green banner was still there. Paid in full. Her first thought was not relief. It was a cold, sharp spike of panic. This was a mistake. A terrible, costly mistake that would bring men to her door. She fumbled for her phone, dialing the collection's number she knew by heart. A gruff man answered on the second ring. "Yeah, my name is Isabella Martinez. I'm calling about my account," she said, her voice shaking. "There's a mistake. It says it's paid, but I didn't." "Martinez," the man grunted. She heard him typing. "Yeah, Martinez, account's closed." "Closed? But who paid it?" "I didn't authorize." "Look, lady," the man said, his voice full of sudden forced patience. "Some trust paid it off. Anonymous benefactor, the full 82,450. You're clear. Congratulations. Have a nice life. The line clicked dead. Isabella sat in the silence. The phone still pressed to her ear. Anonymous benefactor. The words mocked her. There was nothing anonymous about this. There was only one person in her life with that kind of power, that kind of money, and that kind of terrifying, controlling interest. The apartment wasn't a gift. It was a down payment. The debt wasn't erased. It was transferred. He hadn't just bought her apartment. He had bought her. She didn't wait. She didn't change out of her sweatpants. She grabbed her keys, stormed out of the apartment, and rode the elevator down. Her fury, a hot metallic taste in her mouth. She marched the 6 blocks to the Gilded Bean, the cold November wind whipping her hair into her face. It was 10 p.m. The cafe was dark, the chairs stacked on the tables. But she knew. She saw the black sedan parked across the street, the one that was always there, idling. She pounded on the glass door. A moment later, Carmen, who was mopping, appeared from the back, a look of surprise on her face. Isabella, we are closed. Is he here? Isabella demanded, her voice. Carmen's eyes widened, looking over her shoulder from the dark corridor that led to the building's private lobby. Alessandro Romano emerged. He was in his shirt sleeves, no tie, holding a stack of papers. He saw her, wild hair, her fists clenched. He paused, his expression unreadable. He looked at Carmen. It's fine, Carmen. You can go home. I'll lock up. Carmen, visibly relieved, grabbed her coat and scurried out, shooting Isabella a look of profound pity. You paid my debt, Isabella said the moment the door closed. Her voice was tight with rage. You bought me. The words hung in the air between them. Alessandro set down his papers on the counter. He walked closer, his footsteps silent on the polished floor. She backed up until she hit the glass wall. She let out a bitter, shaky laugh. You don't even know me. You don't know anything about me. I see you. The words stopped her breath. He repeated, his voice vibrating through her. I always have. He took a step closer, and she took an involuntary step back, her legs hitting the leg of a table. He had her cornered. I've seen you, he whispered, every morning for 2 years. I saw you counting your tips, your brow furrowed, wondering how you'd make it. I saw you give your own sandwich to that old woman, Mrs. Volkov, who comes in just to get warm. I saw you smile at her, a real smile. And I saw how tired you were the moment she turned away. The air was gone from the room. He was wrong. He wasn't seeing her. He was seeing a story he'd invented. But his gaze was so intense, so certain. It felt like he was peeling her skin back. It had started to rain. A hard driving rain that lashed against the windows, isolating them in their own dark, pressurized world. He lifted his hand. It was a slow, deliberate movement. She flinched. His hand stopped inches from her face. He held it there, steady, waiting for her to stop shaking. Then, impossibly gentle, his thumb brushed a strand of rain-dampened hair from her cheek. I am not Ricardo, he murmured, and her blood ran cold. He knew. How could he know? He leaned in, and she was trapped, pinned by his gaze and the sheer weight of his presence. His lips met hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was slow, yes, but it was burning. It was restrained. But the restraint was that of a man holding back a force of nature. It was a kiss of pure, contained hunger. It was possessive. It was a brand. It tasted of dark coffee, expensive whiskey, and the storm outside. His other hand found her waist, fingers gripping her hip, pulling her flush against him. Isabella's world tilted. Her body, the traitor, melted. Her hands of their own accord gripped the front of his shirt to keep from falling. She kissed him back, a second of pure, mindless surrender, drowning in the heat. And that's what terrified her. She gasped, tearing her mouth from his. She shoved at his chest, a pathetic gesture against a man made of granite. But he let her go. He stepped back, his chest rising and falling, his eyes black in the dim light. His lips were wet, his expression shattered. No, she said again, her voice a sob. She was overwhelmed by the heat, by the control he'd taken, by the fact that she had for 1 second let him. She felt the walls of the cage slamming shut. She turned and ran. She fumbled with the lock on the door and burst out into the night, the cold rain hitting her like a physical blow. She ran all the way back to the Atoria, not stopping, not looking back. Isabella began dating David from apartment 12B a week later. She hadn't quit. She couldn't. She needed the job. So, she'd gone back to the cafe, her face pale, and simply not spoken to Alessandro. She'd put his coffee on the counter and walked away. He had come in every day, his eyes burning holes in her back, the silence between them louder than any argument. David was an architect. He was blonde. He smiled easily and often. He was kind, quiet, and normal. He held the elevator, talked about zoning laws, and asked her to a movie. Isabella said yes. She said yes to prove to herself that she could. She said yes because David was safe. He was the antithesis of the dark, suffocating power she had run from in the rain. He walked her home, their hands brushing. He was a perfect gentleman. As they entered the grand marble lobby of the Ettoria, laughing at a joke he'd made, Isabella felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was possible, a normal life. Then she saw him. Alessandro was standing by the doorman's desk, dressed in a black suit that looked like it was sewn from shadows. He was not looking at them. He was ostensibly talking to the doorman. But his presence sucked all the air and warmth from the cavernous room. David, oblivious, touched her elbow. So, next Friday we could try that new Italian place. Alessandro turned. His head moved slowly, his gaze locking onto David's hand on her arm. Isabella froze. Alessandro's cold mask did not just crack. It shattered. It was not a grand dramatic gesture. It was a sudden violent stillness, a tightening of the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes, and the coldness was gone, replaced by a heat that was visible, a raw, unfiltered fury that promised violence. His gaze lifted, bypassing David entirely, and slammed into hers. Isabella, David asked, his smile faltering. He felt the change in temperature. Everything okay? You know this guy? Isabella's throat was dry. He owns the building. She pulled her arm from David's grasp. Good night. Mr. Alessandro did not acknowledge her. He looked only at David, a look of such utter dismissal. It was an insult in itself. Then he moved. He walked past them toward the private elevator, and he didn't stop. But as he passed Isabella, he leaned in, his voice a low, gravelly whisper meant only for her. He won't protect you like I will. The elevator doors opened, and he was gone. Isabella stood in the lobby, shaken to her core. What a jerk, David said, trying to recapture the mood. Intense guy. You okay? She nodded, unable to speak, and fled to her apartment. She locked the deadbolt, leaning against the solid wood, her heart hammering. She was angry, and to her deepest shame, she was thrilled. She hated him for it. She hated herself for it. Alessandro finally looked up, his eyes like chips of ice. And Marco, she doesn't find out. Not from you. Not from anyone. It's done. It's erased. You think after last night, after the Santangelos, after I put my hands on you, that you can just go back to being a waitress. Go back to dating normal men. He leaned in, his voice dropping. You're already in it, Isabella. You have been since the day I first saw you. He picked up his coat, draped it over his arm, and walked to the door. I have a meeting. I'll have Marco send a car for you. Don't go to the cafe today. Don't go to the bar. Stay here. It wasn't a request. It was an order. You can't tell me what to do, she said, her voice weak. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. He looked back and his eyes were dark with a sadness that shocked her. I'm not telling you. I'm asking you. He left. Isabella did not stay. She was confused. She felt owned and she hated it. She spent the morning pacing the apartment. She was not in it. She would not be. She distanced herself. She ignored his texts. She went back to the cafe, acting as if nothing had happened. Her politeness, a shield of ice. Alessandro watched her, his fury a palpable thing in the small shop, but he did not approach her. He let her have her rebellion. It lasted for 3 days. On the 4th day, she was leaving the Ettoria in the early afternoon, heading to her night shift. She was angry, defiant, and she was not paying attention. A gray van, one she had never seen before, screeched to a halt at the curb in front of her. 2 men jumped out. They were not Alessandro's men. They were rough, their eyes hard. Vincent Santangelo says hello. One of them snarled and grabbed her arm. Isabella screamed, pure animal terror. She fought, kicking and scratching, but he was too strong. He was dragging her toward the open side door of the van. It happened so fast. A black sedan that had been parked across the street roared to life. Jumping the curb, the man who was always reading a newspaper in the lobby. One of Alessandro's guards burst from the Ettoria's front doors. "Let her go," the guard yelled. The man holding Isabella cursed, shoving her hard toward his partner. "Get her in." But it was too late. Alessandro's guard was on him. A second man, the driver of the black sedan, was out, blocking the van. The sounds were sickening. Shouts. The heavy wet impact of fists on flesh. Isabella scrambled backward on the pavement, Crab walking away, her heart trying to escape her chest. One of the Sant'Angelo men was on the ground. The other one, seeing he was outnumbered, jumped back in the van, which squealed away from the curb, leaving his partner behind. Alessandro's guard, Marco, the one from the alley, stood over the groaning man, his breathing heavy. He looked at Isabella, his face grim. "Are you hurt, Miss Martinez?" "I don't." She was sobbing, unable to form words. Marco spoke into his wrist. "She's safe." But it was Sant'Angelo's crew. He broke the truce. He listened, then looked at Isabella. "The boss is on his way." She ran. She bolted back into the Ettoria, past the terrified doorman, and slammed into the elevator, her fingers jabbing the button for her floor. He took the final step, standing directly in front of her. "And then I'd go get coffee, and I'd see this girl with tired eyes and a spine made of iron, who gave away her own lunch, and every day watching you put a crack in those walls." "Alessandro," she breathed, his name a plea. "I'm not a good man, Isabella. I am everything you should run from." He lifted his hand, his knuckles brushing her cheek where her tears had dried. "But that normal, safe man, he will never see you. He will only try to dim your light." The tension in the room was a living thing. It was a wire pulled taut, humming with a frequency that vibrated in her bones. The air was too thick, too hot. His confession hung between them, a raw, exposed nerve. "I've wanted you," he whispered, his voice going rough with an emotion he'd held back for so long. "For years. From the first day you argued with a customer about a refund. I've wanted you." That was it. The wire snapped. He didn't crash into her. He moved with a deliberate, desperate intent. His hand slid from her cheek to her jaw, his fingers tangling in the hair near her ear, tilting her head back. His other arms snaked around her waist, pulling her from the sofa hard against his chest. She stumbled, her hands landing on the solid muscle of his shirt front. She trembled, her fingers gripping the fine cotton. "Don't," she breathed. But it was a lie. "I have to," he groaned, and his mouth came down on hers. It was not like the kiss in the cafe. That had been a question, a brand. This was an answer. This was an explosion. It was deep and urgent, his lips moving against hers with a raw, possessive hunger that stole her breath. He tasted of the cold night and a desperate burning heat. He backed her up, his body a relentless warm wall, until her legs hit the edge of the kitchen counter. Her breath hitched. His name was a choked sound in her throat, his fingers on her jaw tightened, not painfully, but with a claim that left no room for misunderstanding. He kissed her as if he was starving. A slow, desperate, drowning kiss that made her knees weak. She clung to his shirt, her knuckles white with a low growl. He broke the kiss. He lifted her, his strength effortless, and sat her on the kitchen counter. She gasped, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. Now they were eye to eye. His pupils were black, his cold mask utterly gone, replaced by a raw, naked need. "You," he rasped, "are not a mistake." He leaned in again, his lips bypassing her mouth. He pressed a hot, open-mouthed kiss to the pulse point on her jaw, then moved lower, his mouth tracing the line of her throat. Isabella's head fell back, her breath catching in a half-sob. She arched into him, a silent, total surrender, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. His lips found the delicate, sensitive skin of her collarbone, and she felt the damp heat of his breath, the light scrape of his stubble. They were both shaking, lost in a whirlwind of emotion, a restrained hunger that was more powerful than any violence. He hadn't touched her, not really, but he had laid claim to every inch of her. He held her there, his face buried in her neck, breathing her in, and she held him, her small body anchored to his. Both of them finally terrifyingly losing control. The next morning, Isabella woke up tangled in her own sheets, alone. The apartment was silent. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed it. Then she saw it. His black overcoat still draped over the back of her armchair. He had stayed. Not in her bed. He had stayed until she'd fallen asleep, her head on his shoulder, on the sofa. He had carried her to her bed, kissed her forehead, and sat in that chair all night watching her like a guardian, like a predator. When he emerged from the kitchen holding 2 cups of coffee, she froze in the bright morning light in her rumpled sleep clothes. The reality of the night came crashing down. The heat, the desperation, the raw intimacy. He looked at her, his expression calm, watchful. He had taken off his suit jacket. His white shirt was rumpled, the sleeves rolled up his forearms. He looked devastatingly real. "Good morning, Isabella." He offered her a cup. She took it, her hands shaking. "That last night," she stammered. "It was a mistake." His face, which had been open, closed instantly. The cold mask slid back into place. "A mistake?" "Yes," she said, clutching the mug. I can't this life. Your life, the watching, the violence. I'm not ready for that. I don't want to be a part of it." Alessandro set his own mug down on her dresser. He walked to her, his movements calm, deliberate. He stopped a foot away. "You think you have a choice." His voice was not cruel, just factual. "People like me don't get them, and people like you don't give them." She ran into the bathroom and locked the door, her back sliding down the cold marble, her sobs echoing in the huge, empty room. Meanwhile, in a dark, smoky room across the river, Vincent Santangelo, wounded, furious, and having just been warned by a terrified associate that Alessandro Romano was wiping his assets, looked at a grainy photo of Isabella. He had planned to use her now. He had nothing left to lose. He would make Alessandro pay. He would take the one thing the man seemed to care about. Isabella stayed in the penthouse for 2 days. She was a ghost. She and Alessandro circled each other. Their argument, a heavy, unspoken thing between them. He was gentle, desperate to get her back. She was polite, distant, and terrified. She saw the truth. He would kill for her. He would erase families for her. And as long as she was with him, he would have to. The Santangelos, the Sophia, the entire world would come for her to get to him. She was his weakness, the one crack in his wall. She had to protect him, not from them. She had to protect him from herself. On the 3rd night, he had a meeting, one he said he could not miss. He kissed her at the door. A long, desperate, searching kiss. "Wait for me," he whispered. "We will fix this. I will fix this." She nodded. The second the door closed, she moved. She did not pack. Packing would be a clue. She went to her old apartment, the one in the Ettoria. She found a pen and a piece of paper. Her hands were shaking. "Alessandro, you were right. I'm already in it. And it's killing me. But it's killing you too. They will not stop coming for me to hurt you. I cannot be the reason you spill so much blood. I cannot be the weapon they use to destroy you. I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid for you. This is the only way. Don't find me, please." She left the note on his pillow in the penthouse. She took the emergency cash he kept in a desk drawer, $500, and her coat. She walked out of the building, past the doorman he employed, and disappeared into the night. She went to the main bus station, her heart a cold stone in her chest, and bought a one-way ticket to the first bus leaving. It was headed to a small, anonymous city in the next state. When Alessandro returned at 2 o'clock in the morning, the penthouse was silent. He saw the note on the bed. He read it once, twice. The paper crumpled in his fist. The control, the ironclad steel trap control he had spent a lifetime building, did not just break. It detonated. A roar of pure animalistic rage tore from his throat. He swept the lamp from the bedside table, shattering it against the wall. He tore the sheets from the bed, and he went to her apartment, the Ettoria, and kicked the door in, splintering the frame. And he was looking for a clue, a diary, anything. He found nothing. He overturned the sofa. He smashed the mirror in the bathroom. He tore her closet apart, his hands burying themselves in the clothes she had left behind, his breathing raw and ragged. He got on the phone, his voice a lethal, broken snarl. "She's gone. Find her. Marco, you find her now. Call Carmen from the cafe. Call her landlord. Put her face on every street camera in this city. I want every man we have on this. She's not gone. She cannot be gone." His men tracked the credit card he had given her, but she hadn't used it. They tracked her phone, but she had left it on the penthouse nightstand. It was Marco who got the break. 3 hours later. "Boss, we're checking bus station manifests." A woman matching her description. A cash ticket headed north. "The bus left 2 hours ago, but it's making a stop at the central station in the storm. It'll be there for another 30 minutes. Alessandro didn't answer. He was already in his car, driving himself, tearing through the flooded city streets. The storm outside a pale imitation of the one raging inside him. He burst through the doors of the bus station, a whirlwind of water and fury. The place was fluorescent, cold, and smelled of wet wool and despair. He scanned the sparse crowd, and he saw her. She was not on a bus. She was huddled on a hard plastic bench in the farthest, darkest corner. Her knees drawn to her chest, her body shaking. She was soaked. She was shivering. She was weeping into her hands, the picture of a broken, terrified refugee. Isabella looked up, her sixth sense screaming. And she saw him. He was standing there drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead, his black overcoat dripping water onto the linoleum. He was not angry. His face was a raw, open wound of desperation and a terrifying, profound relief. She was found. He moved. His long strides devoured the space between them, his wet overcoat flapping around his legs. He didn't slow. He didn't stop. He walked through the stale fluorescent-lit station like a force of nature. His eyes locked only on her. Isabella scrambled to her feet, wiping her face with the back of her wet, trembling hands. "Alessandro, no," she whispered, her voice a raw croak. "Please don't do this here. Don't make a scene." A few tired travelers slumped over their bags, looked up, their curiosity piqued by his arrival. "A scene," he said, his voice a low, ragged sound that was somehow louder than a shout. He was in front of her now, towering over her, his chest heaving. The sheer animalistic panic in his eyes terrified her. "You ran from me." "I had to," she sobbed, backing up until she hit the cold tile wall. "Please, just go." "Let me go?" "Let you go." He let out a sound, a bitter, broken laugh that held no humor. He reached for her, not gently. His hands, hard and desperate, clamped onto her upper arms. He hauled her away from the wall, away from the bench, pulling her directly into his chest, his arms wrapped around her like steel bands, one hand tangling in her wet hair, fisting the strands, holding her head against his shoulder. He crushed her to him, his face burying in her neck, and he just held on. He was shaking. Or maybe she was. She couldn't tell. He was soaking wet, cold from the storm. But his body was a furnace. He was breathing her in, his breath hot and ragged against her skin. It was not a tender embrace. It was an act of possession, an anchor finding the seabed. It was a man who had been drowning, finally finding air. "You're not leaving," he growled into her hair. "You are never leaving me again." "You're hurting me," she gasped, her hands trapped between their bodies. He loosened his grip instantly, but only by a fraction. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands moving from her arms to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away the rain and tears. His eyes were wild. "Let's go," he commanded. It was not a request. He grabbed her hand, lacing his fingers through her so tightly she couldn't have pulled away if she'd tried. He dragged her through the station, past the staring travelers, and pushed through the glass doors, back out into the center of the storm. The rain was a solid, freezing sheet of water. It hit them instantly, plastering her thin clothes to her skin. She screamed, planting her feet on the wet pavement, trying to pull her hand free. You can't just drag me back." "I won't go." He turned on her, his face a mask of raw, tormented fury. "You would rather be here in this, freezing to death in a bus station, running with nothing. That's the life you want. It's a life you can't touch," she cried, the words torn from her, whipped away by the wind. "It's a life where people aren't ordering families to be erased from me. I'm trying to save you." "Save me?" he roared, pulling her closer. So, they were face to face in the deluge. "By ripping my heart out, by letting me think I'm so cold," she whispered, the fight finally leaving her, body slumping. "I know," he said. "Come home with me." He didn't wait for an answer. He swept his arm under her knees, lifting her effortlessly from the ground. Isabella let out a small, broken cry, but didn't fight. She was too cold, too tired, too defeated by the truth in his eyes. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his wet, cold coat, and let herself be carried. He carried her to his car, which was idling at the curb, its engine a low growl. Marco was in the driver's seat. He didn't look back, just unlocked the doors. Alessandro put her in the back, sliding in beside her, and wrapped her in a heavy wool blanket that had been waiting on the seat. He never let go of her hand. Take us home, Marco, Alessandro said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. The penthouse. The drive was silent. Isabella shivered under the blanket, the car's heater blasting, but the cold was in her bones. She watched the city lights smear by through the rain-streaked glass. She looked at the man beside her. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight, his free hand clenched into a white-knuckled fist on his knee. He looked like a man who had just walked back from the edge of a cliff. He led her into the penthouse. It was silent, dark, the only light coming from the wall of windows. The city's glow filtered through the driving rain. Go, Alessandro said to Marco, who had followed them up. Go home. Get some sleep. Boss Santangelo will be ashes by morning. Alessandro said, his voice flat. But for tonight, go. Marco nodded, his gaze flicking to Isabella, full of a pity she hated. The door clicked shut, leaving them alone in the vast, quiet space. Alessandro turned on a single low-watt lamp, casting the room in a soft, warm glow. He shrugged off his soaking overcoat, tossing it onto a chair. Isabella had been here before, but she had never seen it. She had been a guest, a prisoner, an argument. Now, in the quiet, she saw him. The space was immaculate, cold, all glass and steel and black leather. But on the shelves, tucked away, were things she hadn't noticed. On a side table, there was not one, but 3 framed photographs. She moved closer, her blanket trailing. It was a woman, the same woman at different ages. She was beautiful with dark laughing eyes and a smile so bright it hurt. In one, she was holding a small boy with Alessandro's serious eyes. In another, she was younger, her arms around a man who looked like Alessandro but smiled. My mother, he said, his voice soft behind her. He had shed his suit jacket and was unbuttoning his damp cuffs. She's beautiful, Isabella whispered, touching the silver frame. She was, he said, she died when I was 19. Cancer. She was the light in this family. After she was gone, my father, he trailed off. He became the man I told you about. Isabella looked around this massive, empty, perfect apartment. He walked her to the sofa and sat, pulling her down with him, never letting her go. They spent the night together. But it was not like the first time. It was not a fire. It was an anchor. He held her. He whispered apologies for scaring her, for bringing this world to her door. She whispered apologies for being so stubborn, for not listening. Later, much later, they moved to the bed. It was slow. It was intimate. It was a silent, desperate communication. His hands on her were reverent. Her touch on his face was questioning when he kissed her. It was not with hunger, but with a profound, aching tenderness, a promise to keep the world at bay. It was an emotional connection so deep it scared her more than the kidnapping. As she drifted to sleep, safe in his arms, Isabella saw him for the first time. Not the mafia mask, not the cold granite boss. She saw the man behind it. A man who was lonely, who was terrified of losing her, who was gentle. And as she fell asleep, a cold thought settled in her heart. She was falling in love with him. But she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she did not belong in his world. And a man like that, in a world like that, could never truly belong in hers. The estate was not a house. It was a fortress of old money, perched on a hill overlooking the river, its stone facade looking cold and judgmental even in the warm autumn twilight. Isabella sat in the passenger seat of Alessandro's sedan, the fabric of the dress he had sent to her apartment, a simple, elegant sheath of midnight blue silk feeling alien against her skin. You are silent, he said, his hand leaving the steering wheel to rest on her knee. His touch was warm, possessive, and the only thing keeping her from vibrating out of her seat. I'm a waitress. Alessandro, she whispered, her voice tight. You're taking me to this. They're going to hate me. He parked the car in the circular drive where other vehicles, all of them black and gleaming, were being attended to by valet. He turned to her, his gaze intense in the dim light. They will not hate you. They will respect you because you are with me. And if they do not, his voice dropped, they will answer to me. He led her inside, his hand a solid, unmoving weight on the small of her back. The entryway was a cavern of marble and dark ancestral oil paintings. The quiet, intense hum of conversation stopped the moment they entered. Everyone stared. Isabella felt 100 pairs of eyes from men in immaculate suits who looked like harder, older versions of Alessandro, and from women draped in pearls and severe black dresses, all landing on her. She felt like an imposter. Her dress was new, but she was not. She was the girl who served them coffee. The girl with the immigrant father and the bad debt. She knew it. They knew it. Alessandro, you are late. A woman with iron gray hair and a face like a clenched fist approached his aunt. Sophia, you look well. This is Isabella Martinez. Sophia's eyes raked over Isabella, a dismissive clinical inspection. Martinez, she sniffed as if the name itself smelled bad. She is with me, Alessandro repeated, his voice a quiet command. They were seated at a long, impossibly formal dining table. The clink of silver on porcelain was the loudest sound. Isabella kept her hands in her lap, terrified she would use the wrong fork. She tried to follow Alessandro's lead, but she was paralyzed by the scrutiny. It was his cousin, Sophia, who spoke first. She was beautiful with sharp eyes and a cruel twist to her perfect red lips. She sat across from them, leaning toward Isabella with a smile that was all teeth. Isabella Martinez, Sophia said, her voice carrying across the table. You work at the cafe downtown, don't you? The gilded bean, Isabella's face burned. She felt Alessandro tense beside her. Yes, Isabella replied, her voice barely a whisper. How fascinating, Sophia continued, sipping her wine. My cousin, he brings home a waitress. Tell me, Isabella, did he buy your time for the evening, or are you part of a new charitable outreach program? The insult hung in the air, sharp and glittering as a shard of glass. Isabella could feel the tears, hot and humiliating, stinging the backs of her eyes before she could even think of a reply. Alessandro's voice cut through the silence. It was not loud, but it was so cold, so heavy that the entire table went still. Sophia. His cousin's smile faltered, her face paling. You will apologize to Miss Martinez, Alessandro said, his words precise and deadly. You will show her the respect she is due as my guest, and you will never ever speak to her that way again. Am I understood? Sophia looked for 1 second, like she might argue, but she saw the look in Alessandro's eyes, a look Isabella had seen only once before in the lobby of the Ettoria, and her facade crumbled. Ah yes, cousin. My apologies, Miss Martinez. It was a poor joke. Alessandro did not acknowledge the apology. He turned his attention back to his plate. The message was clear. The matter was closed. Under the table, out of sight of the prying eyes. His hand found hers. His fingers laced through hers, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. A steady, warm, reassuring pressure. It was a hidden touch, a secret anchor in a cold, hostile sea. He did not look at her, but his grip was her entire world. He was defending her publicly and calming her privately. The kidnapping was brutally, almost pathetically simple. She made it to Mrs. Volkov's neighborhood. She was 2 blocks from the apartment building when a dark van slid to the curb. She didn't even have time to scream. The door slid open and a hand clamped over her mouth. She was bundled inside, the smell of oil and fear filling her lungs. They did not speak to her. They drove for what felt like an hour, ending in a cold, damp warehouse that smelled of the river and rotting fish. A man was waiting. Vincent Santangelo. He looked terrible. He was unshaven, his eyes wild and bloodshot, his arm in a crude sling. He was a cornered rat, and he had just found the last piece of cheese. So he rasped, circling her as his men tied her to a simple metal chair. The prince's little bird. He took everything from me. My business, my family, all for you. He backhanded her. The blow was sharp, metallic, and sent a spike of pain through her jaw. Now we see what he's willing to trade. He pulled out a phone, opened a video app, and propped it on a crate. He hit record. Smile, little bird, he spat. You're live. Alessandro was in his war room, a converted study in his penthouse. The city lights a cold, distant backdrop. He had not slept in 2 days. He was running on pure black, undiluted rage. We've neutralized 3 of his safe houses, Marco said, pointing to a map. His main accounts are frozen. He's got nowhere left to a laptop was pushed onto the table. A text message, an unknown link. Boss, Marco said, his voice tight. You need to see this. Alessandro clicked the link. The feed was grainy, the audio poor, but it was her. Isabella tied to a chair, her hair a mess, her lips split and bleeding. She was terrified, her eyes wide and staring, not at the camera, but at something just off-screen. Vincent Santangelo stepped into the frame, his face a mask of triumphant hate, the sound in the war room, the hum of computers, the quiet voices, it all stopped. Alessandro Romano did not move. He did not speak. He simply watched, his face going from the hard, cold mask of a boss to something empty, a void. The calm at the absolute center of a hurricane. He's at the old Red Hook cannery, Alessandro said, his voice a dead, quiet whisper. The one his grandfather owned. Marco looked at him, stunned. How do you the brick work? It's pre-war, and the rust pattern on that girder. He pointed to a shape in the background. He thinks it's his last stronghold. He thinks he's smart. He closed the laptop. He stood up and walked to a locked cabinet. He opened it. Inside were not files, but weapons. He did not reach for them. He simply checked his own shoulder holster, the one he had not worn in years. He turned to his men. His eyes were not angry. They were not human. They were the flat, dead eyes of an executioner. He sent this, Alessandro said, his voice a soft, lethal razor, because he thinks he has leverage. He thinks he can negotiate. He walked to the door. Marco, you take 5 men. He was gentle. He was reverent. His touch on her skin was a question, a plea. He whispered to her, not in English, but in the low, liquid Italian of his mother. Words she didn't understand, but felt in her soul. Amore mio luce. Mia unica, my love, light, my only one. He held her as if she were the only real thing in his world, the only thing keeping him from drifting away into the darkness. He held her as if she were made of spun glass, and at the same time, as if she were his only anchor. It was a slow, profound, emotional collision, a healing. Later, as they lay tangled in the sheets, the storm outside finally exhausted. His promise was a rumble against her ear. I will keep you safe, he whispered, his lips against her temple as she drifted to sleep in his arms. No matter the cost. No one will ever touch you again. The next morning, Isabella woke to the sound of screaming. Not a person, the scream of sirens. Dozens of them wailing in the street far below. She sat up, clutching the sheet. Alessandro was already at the window, pulling on his pants, his back rigid. What is it? She asked, her voice thick with sleep. Stay there, he said. His phone on the nightstand was buzzing, a frantic, angry sound. He snatched it up. He listened, his face going from confusion to a cold, hard white fury. How many? Isabella got out of bed, pulling on his shirt from the night before. Alessandro, you're scaring me. He held up a hand, silencing her. He listened for another 30 seconds, his entire body going still. They didn't hit the penthouse, he said, his voice flat. He ended the call, his hands slowly lowering. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were not the eyes of the man who had whispered to her in Italian. They were the eyes of the boss. They were the eyes of a killer. That was Marco, he said, his voice a block of ice. There was an explosion on the street below. A car bomb. A car bomb. Was it Santangelo? Were they trying to hit you? Alessandro looked at her, his expression something she had never seen before. A cold, abject terror. They weren't trying to hit me, Isabella. The bomb was in your car. My car. I don't have a car. The one I assigned to you. He clarified, his voice rough. The one I had waiting for you in the garage in case you wanted to be normal. It was parked in front of my headquarters. I don't understand, she whispered. They didn't know you were here, he said. The realization dawning on him, horrifying him. They thought you were going to work. They thought you were back at the cafe. The bomb was timed for 8:30 a.m. when you would have been getting in. He walked toward her, the truth settling over them like a shroud. They weren't targeting me, he said, his voice finally breaking. Isabella, they were targeting you. The safe house was a sterile high-rise apartment with bulletproof windows and a view of a bridge. It was silent, clean, and felt more like a luxurious prison than a refuge. They were not the eyes of the boss. They were Alessandro's. They were wide, confused, and then seeing her flooded with a relief so profound it was painful. Isabella, he rasped, his voice a dry croak. He surged forward, grabbing her hand, his other hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb gently tracing her bruised cheekbone. You're awake. Tears hot and immediate welled in her eyes. They spilled over, tracing a path to his fingers. She saw the monster in the warehouse. She saw the blood. She saw the man who had just ordered a war. All for her. and she saw the man sleeping in a chair, terrified of losing her. You still want someone like me? The question, a raw, broken thing. After all this, after what I caused, after what you had to do, he stared at her, his expression shattering. He looked confused. He looked as if she had just spoken in a language he couldn't comprehend. Want you? He said, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned in, his forehead pressing against hers. Isabella. He let out a shaky breath, his eyes closing. You're all I've ever wanted. The final romantic scene happened on a quiet, cold morning, 1 week later. They stood on the rooftop of his penthouse, the city waking up below them. A river of white and red lights in the gray dawn. She was healed mostly. A faint yellow-purple bruise was all that remained on her jaw. Alessandro stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her. He was in a simple black shirt, and he had put his heavy wool overcoat around her shoulders. It swamped her, smelling of him, of safety, of home. It's quiet, she murmured, leaning her head back against his chest. It is, he said, his voice a low rumble. Sant'Angelo is gone. His crew is dismantled. It's over for now, she said. Forever, he corrected. He kissed her forehead. A long, gentle press of his lips. I'm changing things. I'm selling the assets my father loved, the shipping, the other things. I'm keeping the real estate. I'm going legitimate. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. Alessandro, you don't have to. I know, he said, stopping her. I have to because I want to sleep. Because I want to wake up with you in a world that isn't on fire. Because you're all I've ever wanted. Their fingers laced together, and Isabella, for the first time in her life, smiled. It was not the tired, polite smile of a waitress. It was not the terrified, broken smile of a victim. It was a real smile full of light. And it was all for him. She was not invisible. She was not afraid. The end of the story was in fact a beginning. It happened a month later at the city's annual hospital charity gala. The room was a sea of old money and flashing cameras. The same crowd that had been at the estate. The same women with pearl necklaces and cruel judging eyes. Alessandro Romano walked in, and as always the room hushed. But this time he was not alone. He walked in with Isabella Martinez on his arm. She was not in a borrowed dress. She was in a gown of emerald green that matched the fire in her eyes. She was not walking behind him. She was at his side. Sophia, his cousin, looked as if she had swallowed a lemon. An old, powerful man, a rival of his father's, approached. Alessandro, I see you brought a guest. Alessandro stopped. He looked at the man, then at the room, which was watching. He smiled, a small, genuine smile. He turned to Isabella, his eyes full of a love so bright it eclipsed everyone. She is not my guest, Alessandro said, his voice clear and carrying. He brought her hand, the one laced with his, to his lips. This is Isabella Martinez, the woman I love. He ignored the shocked, indrawn breaths. He ignored the whispers in the stairs. He only looked at her. And for the first time, in that room of cold, hard power, they were not looking at a waitress. They were not looking at a liability. They were looking at Isabella. Because now, finally, the world saw her, too. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed the journey of Isabella and Alessandro. Where in the world are you listening from? Please let me know in the comments. If you love stories like this, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe. And finally, please share your thoughts. What was your favorite part? What did you feel? Let me know in English. I read every comment. Thank you again. The weeks that followed the charity gala were unlike anything Isabella had ever experienced. She woke each morning in Alessandro's penthouse, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling endlessly below them like a kingdom they ruled together. He had been true to his word about going legitimate, selling off the darker aspects of his father's empire piece by piece, keeping only the real estate holdings and legitimate businesses. The transformation wasn't easy. There were meetings with lawyers, accountants, and federal agents who had been watching the Romano family for years. Alessandro faced each encounter with the same cold composure he brought to everything. But Isabella could see the strain in the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched when he thought she wasn't looking. She had become his anchor in ways she was still learning to understand. On a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the gala, Isabella sat at the marble breakfast bar in Alessandro's kitchen, reading news articles on her tablet, while he conducted a conference call in his study. The phone rang, and she recognized the number as one of the legitimate business lines. "Mr. Romano's office. This is Isabella," she answered, surprising herself with how naturally the words came. The caller was a potential investor interested in one of Alessandro's downtown properties. As she took notes and scheduled a meeting, Isabella realized this felt right. She wasn't just Alessandro's girlfriend playing house in his penthouse. She was becoming his partner in the truest sense. When Alessandro emerged from his study 20 minutes later, his tie loosened and his shirt sleeves rolled up, he found her typing on her laptop, phone tucked between her shoulder and ear as she confirmed details with their attorney about a property closing. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her with an expression of quiet amazement. When she finished the call, he crossed to her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "You're remarkable," he said, his voice carrying that tone of wonder she was beginning to recognize. "You've taken to this like you were born for it." Isabella turned in his arms, her hands smoothing the front of his shirt. "Maybe I was. Or maybe I just found something worth building." Their relationship deepened in ways that went far beyond the physical attraction that had initially drawn them together. Alessandro began sharing stories of his childhood, memories of his mother that he had locked away after her death. Isabella learned about the boy who had loved piano lessons and building model airplanes, who had dreamed of becoming an architect before his father's death thrust him into a world of violence and control. In return, she shared her own dreams, the ones she had put aside when her father's debts consumed her life. They talked about travel, about the small cafe she had once imagined owning, about the children they might someday have who would never know the fear and violence that had shaped both their early lives. The physical intimacy between them evolved as well, becoming deeper and more trusting. Where their first encounters had been charged with desperation and the electric tension of forbidden attraction, now their lovemaking carried the weight of commitment and genuine care. Alessandro was endlessly gentle with her, as if he still couldn't quite believe she had chosen to stay. Isabella found herself marveling at the contradiction he represented. This man whose reputation could clear a room with a single glance, who whispered Italian endearments against her skin and traced her face with fingers that shook with reverence. But their newfound happiness wasn't without challenges. Vincent Santangelo's criminal network hadn't been completely dismantled, and remnants of his organization occasionally tested Alessandro's resolve to stay legitimate. On a rainy Thursday evening, Marco appeared at the penthouse with news that a group of Santangelo's former associates were trying to muscle in on one of Alessandro's construction sites. In the old days, Alessandro would have responded with swift and brutal violence. Instead, he called his lawyer and the FBI task force that was helping him transition away from criminal activities. The threat was handled through legal channels, but Isabella could see the effort it cost him to choose that path. The most significant challenge came from an unexpected source. Elena Romano, Alessandro's aunt and the family matriarch, arrived unannounced on a cold December morning. Isabella had heard about Elena, but never met her. She was a formidable woman in her 70s, elegant and sharp-eyed, who had helped raise Alessandro after his mother's death. Elena had been traveling in Europe when Alessandro began his transition to legitimacy, and her return marked a crucial test of how much the Romano family would accept the changes he was making. Elena studied Isabella with the practiced assessment of someone who had navigated decades of family politics and dangerous alliances. They sat in Alessandro's living room while he was at a meeting, the winter light casting long shadows across the polished floors. Elena spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You love him," she said, not really a question. It was obvious to anyone with eyes that Isabella and Alessandro were deeply committed to each other. "I do," Isabella replied simply. She had learned from Alessandro that sometimes the most powerful response was the most direct one. Elena nodded, as if this confirmed something she already suspected. "He is different since you came into his life. Softer in some ways, but stronger in others. His father, may God rest his soul, would not have understood the choice Alessandro is making. But his mother," she paused, glancing at one of the photographs on the side table. "Isabella would have liked you very much." That evening, Alessandro found the two women cooking dinner together, Elena teaching Isabella the family recipe for osso buco while sharing stories about Alessandro's childhood that made him both groan with embarrassment and smile with genuine warmth. Watching his aunt and the woman he loved bond over memories and shared hopes for the future, Alessandro felt a sense of completeness he hadn't known he was missing. This was what family was supposed to feel like, what home was meant to be. The transition continued through the winter months. Alessandro sold the last of his father's questionable enterprises and reinvested the money in legitimate businesses. He opened a small foundation dedicated to providing educational opportunities for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, something Isabella had suggested during one of their late-night conversations about making amends for past actions. The foundation's first scholarship recipient was a young girl from Isabella's old neighborhood, a bright student whose family couldn't afford the private school that would give her the best chance at success. Spring brought new possibilities and deeper commitments. Alessandro surprised Isabella with keys to a small property in the Arts District, a beautiful old building with large windows and exposed brick walls. "It's yours," he said as they stood in the empty space. "For your cafe, or whatever you want to build here." The gesture took Isabella's breath away, not just because of its generosity, but because it represented his faith in her dreams and his commitment to building a future together. Isabella spent weeks planning and designing her cafe, working with architects and contractors who had come to know her through Alessandro's legitimate business dealings. She wanted to create something warm and welcoming, a place where people could feel safe and nourished. Carmen, her former co-worker from the Gilded Bean, agreed to help manage the day-to-day operations, thrilled to be part of something that felt like family rather than just business. As summer approached, their relationship faced one final test. David, Isabella's former neighbor from the Etoria, appeared at the construction site of her new cafe on a warm June afternoon. He had been traveling for work and hadn't heard about the dramatic changes in Isabella's life. Seeing her in designer clothes directing contractors, he was clearly confused and somewhat hurt that she had never reached out to explain her sudden disappearance from his life. Isabella took him for coffee at a nearby shop, explaining as gently as she could about her relationship with Alessandro and the circumstances that had brought them together. David listened with the expression of someone trying to reconcile the woman sitting across from him with the quiet waitress he had briefly dated. "You seem happy," he said finally. "Different, but happy. It's just hard to believe that the same person who was afraid to let me walk you to your door is now building a business with a man like Alessandro Romano." The conversation was interrupted by Alessandro's arrival. He had come looking for Isabella when Marco informed him about David's unexpected appearance. Alessandro approached their table with the controlled grace Isabella had come to recognize, assessing the situation before deciding how to respond. His greeting to David was polite but unmistakably territorial, and Isabella could see David finally understanding the true nature of the man he was dealing with. After David left, clearly shaken by the encounter, Alessandro sat beside Isabella and took her hand. "Are you having second thoughts about any of this?" he asked quietly. "About us, about the life we're building together." Isabella looked at this man who had transformed himself from a feared mafia boss into someone capable of tenderness and legitimate success, all while never losing the core strength that made him who he was. "Never," she said firmly. "What we have is real, Alessandro. It's worth everything we've both given up to get here." The grand opening of Isabella's cafe took place on a warm evening in late July. The space was transformed into exactly what she had envisioned. Warm lighting casting golden glows across brick walls adorned with local artwork, comfortable seating areas that encouraged conversation and community. Alessandro had insisted on providing security for the event, but it was the subtle kind that didn't interfere with the celebration. Elena was there, having flown back from Italy specifically for the occasion. Carmen worked behind the espresso machine with the confidence of someone finally in her element. Local business owners and residents from the surrounding neighborhood mingled with some of Alessandro's legitimate business associates, creating exactly the kind of diverse, welcoming community Isabella had hoped to foster. Alessandro gave a brief speech, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded space as he thanked everyone for supporting Isabella's dream and spoke about the importance of building legitimate businesses that strengthened communities rather than exploiting them. When he introduced Isabella as his partner in every sense of the word, the applause was genuine and warm, a marked contrast to the cold reception she had received at the Romano family estate months earlier. Late that night, After the last guests had departed and the cafe had been cleaned and secured, Isabella and Alessandro walked slowly through the empty space hand in hand. The scent of coffee and fresh pastries still lingered in the air, mixing with the summer breeze that drifted through windows they had left open. "This feels like the beginning of something," Isabella said, leaning into Alessandro's warmth. "Not just the cafe, but everything we're building together." Alessandro pulled her closer, his free hand stroking her hair as they moved through the space she had created. In the soft lighting, surrounded by the tangible evidence of their shared future, he looked younger somehow, less burdened by the weight of his family's dark legacy. "You've given me something I never thought I could have," he said quietly. "A legitimate life, a real future, a reason to be better than what I was raised to become." Their conversation was interrupted by Isabella's phone buzzing with a text message. It was from an unknown number, and the message was simple but chilling. "Congratulations on your success. Some debts can never be fully paid. Vincent Santangelo sends his regards." Isabella's blood ran cold as she showed the message to Alessandro, watching his expression shift from contentment to the hard, dangerous look she remembered from their earliest encounters. Alessandro made several quick phone calls, his voice sharp with barely controlled fury as he contacted Marco and other members of his security team. Santangelo was supposed to be finished, his organization completely dismantled, but clearly some loose ends remained. The federal task force Alessandro had been working with was notified, and within an hour the cafe was surrounded by both private security and FBI agents treating the threat as credible and immediate. The investigation that followed revealed that Santangelo had been operating from a federal prison, using smuggled cell phones and loyal associates to maintain a shadow network focused entirely on revenge against Alessandro. The threat was real, but it was also the final desperate gambit of a man who had lost everything and wanted to drag his enemies down with him. Alessandro's response was measured and entirely legal. Instead of reverting to the violent methods of his past, he worked with federal authorities to provide information that led to additional charges against Santangelo and the complete dismantling of his remaining network. The process took several weeks, during which Isabella and Alessandro lived under constant protection, but it ended with Santangelo being transferred to a maximum security facility where his ability to threaten anyone was permanently eliminated. The experience brought them closer together, reinforcing their commitment to the legitimate life they were building while reminding them both of how far they had come from the violent world that had originally brought them together. Isabella's cafe reopened with even stronger community support, and Alessandro's reputation as a legitimate businessman continued to grow stronger with each passing month. As autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and golden light that slanted through the cafe windows in the late afternoon, Isabella and Alessandro began discussing more permanent commitments. They had been living together for nearly a year, building a business partnership that complemented their personal relationship, creating something that felt sustainable and real. On a crisp October evening, as they walked along the riverfront near Alessandro's penthouse, he stopped suddenly and turned to face her. The city lights reflected off the water behind him, creating a backdrop that was both romantic and somehow perfectly suited to their unique love story. "Isabella Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet intensity that had first captured her attention in the cafe all those months ago. "You've changed everything about my life, made me want to be worthy of the love you've given me." He dropped to one knee on the stone walkway, pulling out a ring that caught the light from the street lamps and threw it back in brilliant flashes. It was beautiful but not ostentatious, elegant in a way that spoke to her tastes rather than his ability to spend money. "Will you marry me?" he asked, "and build this life with me officially, permanently, with all the love and partnership we've already discovered together?" Isabella's answer came without hesitation, born from months of building trust and genuine partnership with this man who had transformed himself as completely as she had. "Yes," she said, allowing him to slip the ring onto her finger before pulling him to his feet, and into a kiss that tasted of promises and possibilities and the kind of future neither of them had dared to dream about a year earlier. Their engagement was celebrated with a small dinner at the penthouse, attended by Elena, Carmen, Marco, and a few other close friends who had become their chosen family. The conversation flowed easily between English and Italian, between stories of the past and plans for the future, creating the warm, loving atmosphere that had become the hallmark of their relationship. Elena raised a toast late in the evening, her voice carrying the weight of years and the authority of someone who had seen the Romano family through its darkest periods. To Alessandro and Isabella, she said, who have proven that love can transform even the most broken things into something beautiful. Your children will grow up knowing safety and love instead of fear and violence. Your mother, Alessandro, is smiling down on this family tonight. The wedding planning that followed was a reflection of their journey together, combining traditions from both their backgrounds while creating something entirely new. They chose a small ceremony in the garden behind Alessandro's childhood home, now renovated and stripped of its association with violence and danger. The guest list was carefully curated, including only those people who had supported their transformation and shared their vision for a legitimate, peaceful future. Isabella wore her grandmother's pearls with a dress that Elena had helped her choose, something elegant but not ostentatious that honored the solemnity of their commitments while reflecting the joy they found in each other. Alessandro wore a charcoal gray suit instead of black, a symbolic choice that represented his departure from the darkness of his past. The ceremony itself was conducted by a judge who had worked with Alessandro during his transition to legitimacy, someone who understood the significance of the promises they were making to each other and to their community. When they exchanged vows, speaking words they had written themselves about transformation, partnership, and building something beautiful from broken pieces, there wasn't a dry eye among their small gathering of loved ones. Their reception was held at Isabella's cafe, transformed for the evening with lights and flowers that created an intimate, magical atmosphere. Carmen had worked with a small catering company to create a menu that combined flavors from both their backgrounds, Italian dishes that honored Alessandro's heritage alongside Mexican specialties that celebrated Isabella's family traditions. Marco gave a speech that surprised everyone with its eloquence and emotion, talking about watching his boss transform from a man driven by duty and violence into someone capable of love and legitimate success. He thanked Isabella for showing Alessandro that strength could be gentle, that power could be used to build rather than destroy. As the evening wound down and their guests began to depart, Isabella and Alessandro found themselves alone in the cafe that had become such an important symbol of their shared future. They moved slowly through the space, collecting flowers and straightening chairs, working together with the comfortable synchronization of true partners. When everything was clean and secure, they stood together in the center of the room where they had first begun building their legitimate life together. The ring on Isabella's finger caught the light from the street lamps outside, a constant reminder of the promises they had made and the future they were creating. Mrs. Romano, Alessandro said softly, testing out her new name with obvious satisfaction. It suits you. Isabella smiled, remembering the frightened waitress she had been just over a year ago, when the idea of being connected to Alessandro Romano in any way had seemed terrifying and impossible. Now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Their honeymoon was a trip to Italy, where Alessandro showed Isabella the village where his grandparents had been born and the legitimate businesses that had provided the foundation for the family's later wealth. They visited Elena's childhood home and walked through olive groves that had been in the Romano family for generations, connecting Isabella to a history that was now hers to help shape. In a small church in Tuscany, they lit candles for Alessandro's parents and Isabella's father, asking for blessings on their marriage and forgiveness for the pain that had brought them together. The priest who blessed their union spoke about redemption and second chances, about how love could transform even the most wounded hearts. When they returned to the city, it was to begin their life as a married couple with clear plans and shared goals. Isabella's cafe had become a neighborhood institution during their absence, managed expertly by Carmen and supported by a loyal customer base that valued the sense of community it provided. Alessandro's legitimate businesses continued to grow and prosper, providing employment for dozens of people and contributing to neighborhood revitalization projects throughout the city. He had become the kind of businessman his mother would have been proud of, using his intelligence and natural leadership abilities to build rather than destroy. 6 months after their wedding, Isabella discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with a joy that was complicated by memories of their own difficult childhoods, but ultimately strengthened by their determination to give their children the safety and love they had both missed in their early years. Alessandro was incredibly protective during Isabella's pregnancy, hiring additional security and insisting on accompanying her to every doctor's appointment. But his protectiveness was gentle rather than controlling, born from love rather than possessiveness. He read parenting books and attended childbirth classes with the same focused intensity he brought to business negotiations. Elena moved back to the city during Isabella's final trimester, taking up residence in a guest apartment Alessandro had prepared in his building. She wanted to be close when her great-grandchild was born, ready to help pass on family traditions and provide the kind of generational stability that had been missing from both Alessandro and Isabella's early lives. Their daughter was born on a snowy February morning, arriving healthy and strong after a relatively easy labor. They named her Sofia Elena Romano, honoring both Alessandro's aunt and Isabella's grandmother, creating a name that bridged their families and represented hope for the future. Holding his daughter for the first time, Alessandro wept openly, overwhelmed by the realization that this tiny person would never know fear or violence, would grow up surrounded by love and legitimate success rather than the darkness that had shaped his own childhood. Isabella watched her husband become a father and felt her heart expand with love for both of them. Sofia's christening was held at the same small church where Alessandro and Isabella had been married, with Elena serving as godmother and Marco as godfather. The ceremony was attended by their closest friends and business associates, people who had supported their transformation and would help provide Sofia with the extended family she would need as she grew. As their daughter grew from infant to toddler, the cafe became a gathering place for other young families in the neighborhood, with Isabella hosting playgroups and story times that created the kind of community connections she had always dreamed of fostering. Alessandro would often stop by during his lunch breaks, sitting in a corner booth with Sofia on his lap, while she babbled at him in the mix of English and Italian that was becoming her natural language. Their second child, a son they named Antonio after Alessandro's grandfather, was born 3 years later during a warm spring that felt full of promise and possibility. Having 2 children to protect and provide for only strengthened Alessandro's commitment to the legitimate life they had built together. Elena, now in her 80s but still sharp and engaged, became the kind of grandmother Isabella had never had, teaching the children Italian songs and family recipes while sharing stories about their heritage that connected them to something larger than themselves. She lived to see Sofia start kindergarten and Antonio take his first steps, passing away peacefully in her sleep on a summer evening when the children were 5 and 2. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched, from family members to business associates to neighbors who had benefited from her quiet generosity over the years. Alessandro spoke at the service about the woman who had helped raise him and had lived to see him build the kind of life his mother would have been proud of. As the years passed, Isabella and Alessandro's love deepened and matured, sustained by shared goals and genuine partnership rather than just passion. They faced the normal challenges of any marriage, disagreements about business decisions and parenting choices, periods of stress when work demands conflicted with family time. But they also experienced the deep satisfaction of building something lasting together, watching their children grow up safe and loved, seeing their businesses contribute positively to their community. The cafe had become an institution, and Alessandro's real estate empire had grown to include affordable housing projects that provided decent homes for working families. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they returned to the riverfront where Alessandro had proposed, this time accompanied by their children who ran ahead along the walkway, while their parents walked hand in hand behind them. The city had changed around them, growing and evolving, but their love had remained constant. Looking back at the frightened waitress and dangerous mafia boss they had once been, it seemed almost impossible that they had found their way to this peaceful, prosperous life. But every challenge they had faced had made them stronger. Every choice to build rather than destroy had brought them closer to the people they were meant to become. Their children would grow up knowing that love could transform anything, that people could change if they were willing to do the work, That family was something you built through choice and commitment rather than something you were simply born into. In the end, that was the greatest gift they could give to the next generation. Proof that even the most broken things could be made beautiful with enough love and determination. As Sophia and Antonio grew into teenagers, they brought new energy and perspectives to the family businesses. Sophia showed an early aptitude for the hospitality industry, often helping at the cafe after school and developing ideas for expanding their community programming. Antonio was fascinated by his father's real estate development work, spending weekends visiting construction sites and learning about sustainable building practices. Both children spoke fluent Italian and English, moved easily between the worlds their parents had created, and showed no signs of the fear or violence that had marked earlier generations of the Romano family. They were confident, kind, and deeply loved, exactly what Isabella and Alessandro had hoped to achieve when they first began building their life together. The transformation was complete, the circle closed, the promise fulfilled. Love had conquered fear, legitimate success had replaced criminal enterprise, and two broken people had become whole by choosing to build something beautiful together. In the end, that was all any love story could hope to accomplish, the creation of something better and more lasting than what had existed before. Years later, when Isabella would tell the story of how she and Alessandro had found each other, she would always emphasize that it wasn't just about falling in love. It was about choosing every single day to be better people than they had been the day before. It was about building a legacy that their children could be proud of, creating a family that was defined by love rather than fear. And in the quiet moments, when she watched Alessandro reading bedtime stories to their grandchildren, or saw him teaching Sophia's son how to make espresso the traditional way, Isabella knew with absolute certainty that every risk they had taken, every sacrifice they had made, had been worth it for the life they had built together. Thank you for following Isabella and Alessandro's complete journey from fear to love, from violence to peace, from broken individuals to a strong, loving family. Their story reminds us that transformation is always possible when we choose love over fear, building over destroying, and hope over despair. Please share your thoughts about their journey and let me know which moments touched your heart the most. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love conquering all.